This video has been a long time coming for me. I've been wanting to talk about this series since the beginning of the channel. In fact, back then, Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX got released for Switch, and I had a video in development about it, but for lots of reasons that subject kept being pushed back. Whenever I talk about this series to people, I'm either greeted with blank looks, or they'll talk about, oh yeah, it's that series where you swap discs. And then I'll have to educate them that there's much more about it, and I'll tell them there are games that don't involve discs at all, and they'd be like, well, what's the point of playing it then? So because of this, I need to talk about Monster Rancher, in equal parts to spite these people, and I have a hyperfixation where I have to educate people about this series. In particular, I want to talk about one of the releases that doesn't use CDs at all, so it's time to welcome the Gameboy Advance Monster Rancher titles. Specifically Advance 2, which is my preferred entry for a myriad of reasons. It basically makes the first installment look like a rough draft of what was to come. But first, I need to get into the history of the special franchise. The mid to late 90s were a magical time, when virtual pets were taking the world by storm instead of being the weird niche they are now. Tamagotchi in particular was more iconic than your parents' faces. It's all the chores of having a pet, like feeding it and cleaning up its feces, without having to pet it or play with it. Yeah, no wonder kids loved it. Monster Rancher, despite being called a Pokemon clone by lots of people for decades, is just, well, it's a complex virtual pet that was initially stuck to your TV rather than being a thing to fidget with in the car. 1997 saw the release of the first of what was to become quite a few Monster Rancher games, and when I tell people that, they usually say, wait, they made more than one? The average video game playing enthusiast knew the series because it had large magazine ads that showcased the central gimmick, instead of just getting an egg and raising it and watching it evolve. The Monster Rancher series set itself apart by having you unlock your monsters by opening up the PlayStation tray while the game was on, taking out the disc, and putting in a new disc. Be it a PlayStation game or music CD, it would be generated by reading that disc's data, and then you put your Monster Rancher game back in and resume. It felt like magic, and it still kind of is, even though I do know the technology of how it works now as an adult. This game was such a hit that it branched off into the world of anime, and this was my introduction to Monster Rancher as a kid. In particular, the English dub with all its delicious cheese and censorship of profane things like crucifixion, violence on humans, and worst of all, stinky farts. The timing of the anime was perfect since it coincided with the release of Monster Rancher 2, the fan favourite of the series and my personal introduction to the video games, though it was just called Monster Rancher in PAL territories because we didn't get the first game, or most of the sequels from what I can tell. This was our White Whale, and I sunk so much time into this hot new game as a kid. It was based on one of my favourite cartoons. Of course, I didn't know the actual development order. But this is to some the perfect monster ranching experience, and I totally get why. But the problem for me was, it wasn't made for a handheld system with a terrible screen. The series would continue on PlayStation 2, those being the main titles Monster Rancher 3, 4, and EVO, or Evo, I'm not sure, but that's kind of a spin-off, but it was also called Monster Rancher 5 in Japan. It's a very different game. Regardless, it never made its way to PlayStation 3, or really any other pure home console. This series was very niche outside of Japan, and it was presumed to have died until very recently, where we saw a slight pulse. Until the Nintendo Switch saw the enhanced ports of Rancher 1 and 2, and more importantly, the first brand new entry in well over a decade, Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher, a bizarre Ultraman themed game that's still canon to Monster Rancher somehow. The series had remained dormant, with just 2 games on the DS being its swan song, one of which didn't even release outside of Japan. Actually, that's a little misleading. We did get Suezo and Super Monkey Ball. He's paid DLC and he's no longer available, but hey, that's something. I still bought him. I think I'm the only person who did. But during that eulogy, I skipped over something: the Game Boy games. The Game Boy Color was home to some spin-offs in different genres, like this one that's a card game, but more importantly, the Game Boy Advance had 2 Monster Rancher titles that are basically main series. Unlike the DS releases, which were likely done because it was cheaper to make a small game on DS than an HD game for PlayStation 3, Advance 1 and 2 were made in tandem with their main console entries for PlayStation 2, and are more of a way just to get your Rancher fix on the go, rather than just being your only Rancher fix. And the Game Boy Advance games are extra nice because Rancher 3 and especially 4 were changing things up quite a bit. So these less powerful games on the GBA are more so throwbacks to the first two games for PlayStation 1. So for those of you that wanted the series to continuously evolve and feel different, you had home consoles, but for nostalgic freaks, the Game Boy Advance was keeping you going. And personally, the limited hardware of the Game Boy Advance games made them really easy for me to emulate as a kid, and I didn't feel like a freak playing with the keyboard. It was better than importing a copy with money I didn't have because I spent all my allowance on Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So of course I had to emulate these as a young child. So while these games weren't the ones that I wasted my childhood on, that would be Rancher 2, these are still games that I have some childhood nostalgia for. These are the trilogy of Monster Rancher games that I got to play before I had bills and I got depressed. Advance 2 was obviously a sequel to Advance 1. It's set in the same world, it features many of the characters, but this is also a sequel to the two games for the original PlayStation, as we get the return of Holly in a main role, as well as people in her circle. For those of you unaware, which I assume is most people watching this, Holly was our assistant in the first game, but by the time of the second game, she stopped being a mere assistant and became a monster breeder in her own right. She was famous, successful, and a sort of friendly rival late game. But this time in Advance 2, she wants a fresh start, and has moved to a whole new place named Age Island, and is choosing to start off as an assistant again rather than being a breeder. She wants to get back to the basics, and I assume it's what she prefers doing overall, even though she's no slouch in the breeding department. I should have rephrased that. We'll see this again in the Kaiju game where Holly is back as an assistant, because it's easier to nostalgia bait us than to create a whole new character to love. But the first Advance game actually did create a new assistant to love, and her name was Aroma, and she returns here in Advance 2 as a friendly ally and a little bit of a rival, as well as her brother Zest, who's just kind of along for the ride. This is all because both Game Boy Advance games use the same island. It's wonderful connective tissue to one of the more underappreciated games in the series, and tying the GBA games to the first PlayStation games is a genius move. It allows almost every returning fan to feel a connection right off the bat, and it also subtly tells you, hey, there are some other games in the series that you should play, they're good too. The assistant is the most important character in their respective games. In most Monster Rancher games, we basically play as a faceless, genderless void of nothing. Soul treated like us, the real human playing the game, are the monster breeder, and since we can't talk to the system directly, we have no avatar or real dialogue beyond giving instructions or navigating menus. The assistant is basically the face of the game. They tell us the monster's condition and status. They're the ones characters in-universe talk to for any kind of back and forth. Holly in this game is the main character, she's just not the protagonist, since she talks to us directly, and she relies on us to give proper instructions. Lots of other familiar faces make a return here, like I said earlier. Mostly Advance 1 side characters, but some people in Holly's orbit show up here again. Like Carnab, the lovable explorer who leads expeditions. But we also see Holly's former teacher Teska make an appearance here, as does Colt's trainer Pabs. This is the comeback story for all the old men in the series. Those latter two old men only had one main appearance before this, and they were kind of retired with Advance 2. So it's so nice as a longtime fan of the series to be given more of the established cast that I already loved, especially since these guys are given quite a bit of story significance towards the end of Advance 2's narrative. It feels like they wanted this to be a great bookend to the first few games, though new players shouldn't feel lost because any of the Monster Rancher games are very beginner friendly, and you don't need to know all the lore. For those of you not really in the know, Monster Rancher as a series is basically, what if Horse Girl games were about monsters that fought each other? We live on a ranch, and we feed our lovable little abomination. We train it to increase its stats, make sure not to overwork it or stress it, and we give it plenty of rest. And this series made its conversion from PlayStation Home Console to Game Boy Advance seamlessly. The PlayStation 1 games weren't exactly graphical powerhouses. It's just a series of menus with some animation to make it feel like you're raising a living creature that has feelings. And while these animations were simplified for GBA, not too much is lost. And in some aspects, the second GBA game went above and beyond what its fancier, polygonal predecessors could do. Because this is all sprite-based, visual variety isn't just dependent on seasons or weather. We get lots of extra accoutrements. Sometimes we'll see creatures like bunnies, frogs, and squirrels walking about, or flying birds and dragonflies doing their thing. There's a big lake in the background which will sometimes feature boats or even fish jumping out. There's ducking that swim in it, and when it's winter that lake will freeze over and people can skate on it, or penguins will just be there being chill little guys. Obviously this was much easier to do when all these details are just a few pixels on a tiny little screen. But the end result is this farm feels more alive and like a part of a world than any of the other games in the series, no matter how much more visually complex the other games were. The first Advance game had a simplified version of this too, and I love it. But I just have to praise how visually different these two games are, even though they were released only 1 year apart, and obviously for the same system. Advance 1 based its visual identity off Monster Rancher 2. The largest examples of this are we have more realistic designs for creatures like Suezo and Golem. This came out after the more cartoonish Monster Rancher 3 for PS2. But it felt like a juxtaposition when creatures from that game, which were all little cartoony guys, were put in a game with a realistic Suezo. The art styles didn't blend well together. Like, look at Suezo from Monster Rancher Advance 1 and put them next to Octopi. These look like they should be from two different games, because they initially were. The second game for Nintendo's handheld split the difference. It brought back all the monster breeds from Advance, as well as bringing in a few more classics and new faces on top of that. But the designs were tweaked a bit where applicable. Most monsters look the same across both games, and the newer ones blend in here really well. But creatures like Suezo and Golem were given a massive facelift to be their Rancher 3 designs. So everything in Advance 2 is more cartoonish and upbeat, and it all looks perfect together. In some very specific ways, this is my favourite looking entry in the series. This is definitely the cutest Suezo has ever looked, even though I know this is a simplified version of his PlayStation 2 model. It looks more cute here than it did in that game, probably because I can only see it from the intended angles, and all the sprites were tailor-made for that. That said, this game's hardware does harm the visual variety of monsters. Lots of extra details from monster mixed breeds are lost, and they're all palette swaps here. For example, the monster that's called Horny, and yes, that's its actual name, features a prominent horn. But here in Advance 2, Horny is just a blue Suezo. It lost most of its tiger influence, unfortunately. This is prominent across the whole game, but it's a small concession at the end of the day. Since I expect most of you not to be entrenched in Monster Rancher lore, I'll just have to explain it's set in a world similar to our own. We have humans and all the other animals you know and love. The world was even once a mega continent called Pangaea. But in ancient times, God created monsters to live alongside the rest of nature. However, after some time, the monsters wreaked havoc, so God sealed up all the monsters in stones so peace could be restored. This is all ancient history for Monster Rancher games. We're now in a world where human archaeologists have rediscovered these artifacts and have started reviving these monsters, and they're living in harmony with humans again. In most of the series, the revival process entails going to a shrine, opening up your PlayStation Home Console, taking out the disc, putting in another disc, I said it earlier. Our real-world discs are analogous to the in-universe disc stones for monsters are sealed in. But the thing is, disc swapping is a tiny part of the actual gameplay of Monster Rancher. You only do it when you need new monsters, which you usually only do after a monster retires or dies. But this is all people think the series is, to the point I've had people say it's foolish that they even attempted this on GBA. And admittedly, the way you get monsters here is a lot less cool than it is on the PlayStation. But this is still a small part of the game. This whole region of Age Island gets their monsters through a different process, and for us, the real world human playing the game, it just means we're given a character entry screen where we get to put numbers and letters, type in a few, and bam, you'll get a monster associated with that combination. It's function over form. It's comparatively lifeless, but this also means you don't have to scour your house for new things to input, and this makes it a great portable solution. Everything in this game is contained within the game. You don't need outside data in order to complete things. It also means you can type in swear words and you get monsters from it, which was really entertaining as a kid. That said, getting monsters at the beginning is a little frustrating because you have to unlock a lot of rare monster breeds by progressing the story, and you can only start off with small ones until you upgrade the size of your barn. When you start the game, on a lot of cases you'll get told you can't get this monster, even though you typed in the right numbers and letters, because you don't meet the requirements. It sucks, but it's a necessary evil since it gives you goals to aspire to, and makes certain monsters feel like a big deal when you're eventually able to use them. You have to work for the right to see Golem with little cartoony eyes. With a monster in tow, your routine will cement itself. You have a simplified calendar that just tells you week 1, 2, 3, and 4 of a month, and each action you do, be it training, resting, or competing in a tournament, will take an entire week. Tournaments are in the same time every year, so they're easy to predict, and each have a rank requirement to enter them. Your monsters start at E rank, but they're able to climb up all the way to S. This happens by winning the qualification tournaments that happen every 3 months, and if you win, your monster's rank will go up by 1. If you lose, it stays the same. There's not much of a cost. Monsters fortunately can't downgrade their ranks once it's already unlocked it. It's an entirely linear progress in one direction. But the drawback that stops you from being able to entirely dominate this game with a single monster is the same reason that some people just can't get into the series. Monsters have a lifespan of only a few years, on average about 3 to 4, but it can be dramatically lower than that if you push your monster way too hard. Instead of seeing a devastatingly emotional monster funeral here like I had to when I was a kid, in Advance 2 you're just told your monster is too old and can't do anything, so you have to retire them. When you do this, you put them in the freezer, and here they're frozen alive, but unlike on PlayStation 1, they no longer scream in horror when frozen alive. Probably better this way, even though a frozen screaming Suezo has been my Discord server icon for years, it's too iconic. Anyway, repeat this process a few times until you beat the game. And then, you know what? Keep playing. Keep doing the same thing in post-game. Keep playing until you get bored. I know it doesn't sound like much, but this is my comfort series. I return to these games often because I want low-stakes comfy vibes. It's unfortunate the series basically died when it did and peaked long before that, because gamers back then weren't really into cozy vibe games the same way they are now. All our monsters here have the standard stats you'd expect for an RPG. We have things like life, which determines their HP, power, which determines physical attack damage, intelligence for non-physical attacks, agility for their dodge rate, defense as well, and skill represents accuracy. Each monster excels in certain stat growths, though you're free to treat them however you like. Training can involve either raising a single stat a little, or you can do the more exhausting training option, which raises one by quite a bit, another a little, and then decreases a third stat by a little bit as well. Though in Advance 2 specifically, the more intense training methods require a coach, and these are monsters that you have to pay to utilize. You can also convert your own monster to coaches as well, which is probably a more humane fate than turning them into chunks of ice. This type of training is what most players use since it gives you higher gains, but like how Advance 2 added some more depth to it with the coaches, and as coaches some monsters excel as better teachers than others. For best results, don't just brute force things and actually pay attention to what the game tells you. Plus, having these coaches around means we get a little bit more variety in the stock animations of our monster, either succeeding or failing at the training. They're entirely skippable here, but I try not to skip them because it's really funny when the monster gets pancakes if they fail. This is some good stuff. Regardless, it's all automated stuff, and basically it's a mechanic to pass in-universe time in exchange for stat growths. Training is the name of the game here, because tournaments are what the game is ultimately all about, and you can't reach them without a little bit of grinding. These matches are what progress the plot and give you money to continue feeding your guy. They're the same here as they were in home console. I mean, it's been simplified a little bit. Before, you had 4 different ranges for attacks, but now you just have 3. Battle in either elimination matches or round robin style, dependent on the tournament's rules. And these fights are all 1v1. It's presented almost like a fighting game. We have health bars on top, it's on a 2D plane, even in the PlayStation games, and the match is over if the monster runs out of health or the timer reaches 0. But the combat itself plays in a fashion similar to an active time battle role-playing game. Over time, we accrue guts, a number that goes from 0 to 99, and we spend that to do corresponding attacks. Each one costs a certain number of guts. The attacks will either hit or miss depending on a series of factors, namely the monster stats, but also each move has their own accuracy rating. The chance that the attack will land is displayed on screen at all times as a percentage, so you know when to prioritize each move depending on the situation. Some attacks will also drain the enemy of their guts, which is a good way to screw over the opponent, and it's also a way to ruin your day when you're on the receiving end of that. And here, like I said earlier, attacks have 3 ranges. The moves can only be used when both monsters are at the corresponding distance. The game visualizes this expertly as it shows an icon for both monsters across the screen, and the icon's placement over the attack options show the location of both creatures. Just move the monster and in tow icon over the attack you want to use, and you can use it. You can also be out of range completely, which means the monsters are too far away to attack. It's a great way to stall, but while it doesn't look like it because the visuals are simplified here, this is an arena, and there are walls preventing you from backtracking endlessly. At some point, your monster will just be up against a wall, and the monster can keep approaching you no matter how hard you try to stop it. There's also the option to push the monster back, another great stalling move, though I usually use it to create the right distance between us, so then for instance I can use a long distance attack on an enemy, instead of being boxed in. The visuals for the battles here might seem a bit simplified, but it's still a huge step up from Advance 1, which didn't even have moving backgrounds. Once again, I really want to praise the team for how much they improved the second Game Boy Advance installment. The first game's still really good, but when you put both side by side you can see the differences. This feels like a true evolution in basically every aspect. This can also be seen in this game's brand new feature, Counter Attack. A very high risk, high reward tactic that I almost never use, as more often than not backfires, but it's a novel idea to deepen battles. Though AI overuse this, which can make battles easier for you, the human, and exponentially harder for you if you choose not to give instructions to your monster and let them do whatever they want. It might seem like it's a bit overpowered to control the monster directly, though in actuality we're giving instructions to the monsters. Young and unruly monsters often don't listen to what you have to say. This is trying to simulate what would happen if a trainer gave instructions to the monster, rather than play as the monster directly. Battles are the most video gamey this series ever gets, to the point that some games, in particular Monster Rancher 2, have a competitive battle scene where players train the best monsters they can for multiplayer battles. And that's a good segue for a competition. Sorry to break up the video, but I want some sweet engagement. I have a spare copy of the Monster Farm 1 and 2 DX Collector's Edition for Steam. It's a premium collectible, only released in Japan. It's essentially a Steam code in a box for the Japanese Monster Rancher 1 and 2. But it has lots of fancy bonuses. It's all in Japanese, like these booklets including concept art and a history of the series, but it also includes the first 2 games' soundtrack on a CD, a really shitty mochi backpack that feels cheap, and a golden mochi statue that you could bludgeon someone to death with. This is a great get for fans of Monster Rancher, and these aren't cheap. I'm only giving it away because the eBay seller mistakenly sent me the Steam copy when it was advertised as a Switch copy. and I've already been refunded and I have the correct version, so their mistake is your gain. Just comment on this video and include the name of your favourite monster in the series. I'll grab a commenter completely at random, and since no one watches these videos, you have really good odds. Competition will end whenever the next video comes out, whenever that is. But let's get away from these fancy polygonal games and return back to the world of Game Boy Advance. The tournaments are not only a necessity in terms of keeping your monsters fed, but they also signal to the whole region your status as a breeder. In this game in particular, you'll get quite a few friendly rivals, and one not so friendly one who is basically just an aloof anime jerk, but maybe he has a heart of gold. This gaggle of rivals is a great motivator to progress the story. Do you really want the annoying kid or the middle-aged man to be better than you? These boilerplate guys add more personal stakes to the competitions, and on your first time doing any of these rank up competitions, they serve as a boss fight of sorts and you have to beat them, otherwise you won't be able to rank up the tournament. For most of the round robin competitions, you can get away with losing a single match, but these rivals seem programmed to always win, so whenever they're in a tournament with you, you have to defeat them too and not lose a single match. It's a fantastic middle ground approach. You have to defeat them all one time to progress the game, and it does make each of these tournaments basically be something that you can't falter in at all. But once you've already beaten them, you won't have to beat them again, and for subsequent monsters, the tournaments function the way they always have. Since Monster Rancher is a series that's ideally played for dozens or even hundreds of hours, you never have to rematch these guys, so the tournaments can feel less artificially scripted. You have more room for error, though error isn't a huge factor here to begin with. Advance 2 is on the easier side of the series. It's still possible to mess up, but this isn't one of those installments that will beat you into submission. So this makes a perfect entry point, despite the story being a nostalgic throwback to 3 games prior. There aren't any Oakley men here, a giant imposing monster that will scar new players with a difficulty spike. Though every monster that you battle will still have fun nicknames, and my favourite will still go to the E-rank monster himself, simply named Painkill. Completing all the mandatory tournaments is no easy task, and it will often require that players combine monsters together to get better offspring. Though despite being called a breeder, this mechanic is more fusing together creatures into an unholy abomination of science, rather than just letting the two get it on. In most of the games, your offspring is kind of up to chance. You're given a small selection of possible results, but what you get is kind of out of your control. While here in Advance 2, you have to choose exactly what you get, and depending on your outlook, this is either overly simplified, or a great feature that removes bad outcomes and the requirement to save scum to get exactly what you want. I don't even know how I feel about it, but it's interesting nonetheless. I'm glad Advance 2 took some chances. If you do lots of breeding, different generations of monsters can be represented in this game, with a handy little family tree that's nice to look back on. Ah, memories. Remember when that guy was still alive? This particular installment knows how to effortlessly communicate information with the players. It's just a shame the English release removed all the fun monster descriptions from our trusty book on every monster we've ever raised. This was a staple of the series, and even the Japanese versions of Advance 1 and 2 kept these descriptions intact. But for this localized release, it was abandoned. And I get it. If the choice is between not having this game at all, or having it with this small feature missing, this is very much preferable. And this is a small niche game that I could easily see why they didn't put much effort into it, and I'm just glad we got the near-complete release we did. But I can still be sad about what's missing. Now our book just shows us stats, which is nice to have. It's probably more important to have this, but I like flavor text. This game was clearly not given all the care it needed, because the formatting of text is kind of a nightmare here. It's distractingly bad, but never so bad it ruins the experience or anything. It's just that we have line breaks in bad places, often mid-word and sometimes multiple times in the same sentence, and it would be so much easier to format this sentence in a more visually appealing way. Sometimes they don't do line breaks at all, so the text will just run off screen. It's a big issue, and it shows how little love was put into this English release. But the game still plays incredibly well. All the sentences make sense. It's not game breaking, and I'm the kind of person that finds this more funny than annoying, but it is still an issue nonetheless. There is a lot of text here, so I'm glad it was localized as well as it was. We even get to find out about how Holly's parents neglect her, and just repeatedly say she'll never have a boyfriend, and she's sad because she's still single. I feel really bad for Holly for the first time in the series. Sorry though, that's not changing anytime soon. After this game, you're going to move to a different island and assist in raising Ultraman series kaiju, and you're not getting a boyfriend there either. I think your life already peaked a long time ago, Holly, I'm really sorry. Her life isn't going the best way it could, but at least she's not directionless, which we often are when we go on expeditions. These adventures are a common feature of a series. Explore a maze of a location by walking down paths and choosing which turns to make, and whether we should explore ruins, caves, or other notable features of the terrain, all the while we make sure we don't run out of stamina and can return to base camp. Here we have 3 locales to explore, though only 2 of them will be open during the story itself, with 1 more being post-game. There are lots of benefits to coming to these places, like new items, being able to unlock new monsters, or see Holly wear different outfits, which is a cute attention to detail. But here in Advance 2, we can also get soulmates, a new mechanic, which allows our monster to do a special move once per tournament, with the monster that is their soulmate. It's never a required feature and I often forget it exists, but it's another thing that makes Advance 2 what it really is. Much like how combining monsters removes all that randomness and lets players get exactly what they want, here the expeditions aren't random things that pop up and you have to accept or decline the invite. Now the explorer has set up shop in town and you can choose to go on expeditions whenever you want to. Plan around it and do it whenever you want to, rather than being blindsided by the opportunity. This 5th Monster Rancher game really wanted players to have a more comfortable experience overall, but it's not without a little bit of chaos. Learning moves is still up to chance, monsters can still run away when they're on expeditions, and we even get random battles sometimes because stray monsters will show up to the farm looking for a fight. But most excitingly of all, we have a sickness system. Monsters can and will get sick, which requires a trip to the doctor to cure what ails them. This helps me feel a connection to these monsters that other games couldn't quite scratch. My little guy had worms because of some meat I fed him, so I have to use dewormer. Look, it's a living creature, I love him. You can also send the monsters to surgery. I have no idea how this works in universe. This is how we get rid of traits that we don't like. Like sure, when my monster is nearsighted, I can imagine a surgical solution. But most traits are things like charisma, lazy, macho, or different ways to increase the effectiveness of certain attack types. But sure, send them in for surgery and remove anything you don't like. It's entirely ethical here. Even with experimental surgery on monsters, this game and this series as a whole is so damn cozy. There are no wrong games in the series to start with out of the main series. Well, except EVO, but that's just because it's so different. But if I had to recommend a starting place for newcomers, I'd say Rancher 1 or 2 on the original PlayStation, which as I mentioned, have been re-released on PC and Switch. What were you expecting me to say? That the best starting place is this game that I've spent the entire video praising? Well yeah, Advance 2 is another game I'd recommend as someone's first dive into the series. Depending on who you are, the answer is simple. Monster Rancher 1 and 2 bite back at you a bit more. They're fantastic entry points as evidenced by the fact that they were the starting points for many players, and they've still got the legacy that most of the sequels can't aspire to. But they also aren't the most welcoming games either at the end of the day. But if you're looking for a comfier, cozier game that eases you into everything better and doesn't want to mess you up too much, Advance 2 would be the best place in the series to start with. It's a perfecter of much of the series' mechanics, and it has some of the best ideas, and it has weird little mechanics no other game actually has. So pick whichever starting point sounds best for you. Just know that I have a bias towards the GBA. And for Monster Rancher veterans that skipped Advance 2, it isn't something you need to continue ignoring. This is a great way to end the stories of quite a few characters from the older titles, and its easier difficulty makes this a nice alternative to play whenever you want Monster Rancher with less of a time investment. It's been kind of lost in the era where most people playing this game will do so on their computer with an emulator, but Advance 2 was meant to be taken with you. It's a quick bite of Monster Rancher when you're commuting or when you have a lunch break at work. It, more so than any other game in the series, is perfect for small play sessions across multiple weeks or months. So play Monster Rancher and be glad the monsters you have to deal with are your friends. Because next time I'm looking at a Game Boy Color classic where countless monsters want you dead. Resident Evil Gaiden, a late-era Game Boy game that sees Barry and Leon stranded on an ocean liner that's filled to the brim with zombies, and there's barely enough ammo to contain the threat. It's a game most people dismiss because it's a Game Boy game, or others dismiss it because it's non-canon, but I'll praise it relentlessly as one of my all-time favorite games for the Game Boy, and it's a wonderful blueprint that more sequels should have been built off, but unfortunately we live in a timeline where this game stands alone.